gospel. And they were not ashamed to be associated with a prisoner of the gospel. I can imagine today, and I was thinking about this past week, if in the United States, I think, the minister were to be arrested on gospel-related charges, and say, well, that could happen. Well, let's suppose it could. What do you think the church might do in response to that? They might rally behind him, but I think it's just as likely that they would have a meeting and they would say, well, you know, Bob's got a good attorney, let's pray for him, and we need to cut our losses and get somebody else because we got to keep this thing going. But this church was not ashamed of Paul's suffering, and they stood by him. It's like in 2 Timothy when Paul says of Onesiphorus, he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. They stood by Paul. Now, they were not in prison where Paul was. They were not in prison at all. They were not suffering equally, exactly in the same sense that Paul was, but vicariously they were suffering. Because he was suffering, they were willing to stand by him and vicariously suffer that same kind of suffering. He says he talks about the defense and the confirmation. Those are legal terms. One has to do with judicial accusation, and the other has to do with a guarantee or a furnishing of security, maybe something like bail today. What he's saying is, at every phase of my trial, you were with me, and you stood by me faithfully. They didn't take his sufferings as a cue to back down or back away from the gospel. And he says, you're sure partakers of grace with me. God, by his grace, has given them to Paul as his source of great strength. And they become partakers of grace. Listen, ministers and the people that they pastor are conjoined together in a holy union of grace. And as long as we keep before us that every single one of us needs grace, that unity within the church will come easy. It's when people forget how much they need grace, and they begin to take it for granted, the division becomes more likely. Grace is what binds us together. Look with me at verse 8. He goes even further and he says this, for God is my witness how I long for you all with the affection of Christ Jesus. He has a very intense affection for them. Literally, he loves them with his inward parts, his bowels. I can imagine Jason going home this afternoon and saying, Cindy, I just want to tell you how much I want to wish you a happy birthday. I love you with my bowels. And that probably would perhaps garnish a strange reaction. But the idea here is that he loves them with his inward being. We use the same kind of terminology today, just differently. I'm dying to see you. Well, you're not literally dying. You're not literally breathing your last breath. My heart breaks when we're apart. It's not literally breaking, but you understand the kind of idea. Paul wants to make it very clear, I have a devotion and affection for you that is so sincere, it is almost painful to me. And Paul shifts the emphasis then from how he feels, and he says, here's what I pray for you. On the basis of how much I love you, I pray for this. And this I pray, verse 9, that your love may abound still more and more. In other words, I love Jesus, and I love Jesus' people. Paul's desire and prayer is that they likewise will love in that same way. Now, you'll notice there's no direct object mentioned. He says that your love may abound. Well, for who is it to abound? There's no direct object. And the only conclusion that we can come to is that he means that you're to love God and God's people both. Those two things are inseparable. For example, in 1 John 4:7, beloved, let us love one another. Love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. What's the basis of your love for God? Or rather, because you love God, you love one another. Christians, if you're a Christian, there's a powerful indicator, and that is whether or not you love others. In fact, elsewhere in 1 John it says, if you don't love others, you're not of God. You can't be a Christian and refuse to love other Christians. Now, some people like to hug, some people like to greet one another with a holy kiss, some people would rather just have a handshake and a pat on the shoulder. That's not the point. The point is that the emotion that is to be there is a sincere love for others, however you may express it. Paul wants their love to abound, and he wants it to abound still more and more. He's not using hyperbole here. Okay? He's not trying to be melodramatic. He's saying, I want there to be a superabounding love that overflows. Superabounding love is what holds things together. You know, some churches are just trying to get by with no one getting killed. let's see if we can make it in the next 6 months without somebody getting beat up in the parking lot or somebody getting cussed out by email. That's not the Church of Jesus Christ. The Church of Jesus Christ is that kind of strife and hostility does not continue because love overtakes that. When you have churches like that, what you have is churches that don't take sin seriously, and they don't take the command of Scripture to love one another seriously either. If the church is awash in hostility, it points to a bigger problem. If the church is loveless, it points to the fact that the church does not love Christ. And Paul's writing elsewhere, he often speaks of things that abound. I won't give you a lot of examples here, but in 2 Corinthians 1:5, he talks about comfort in times of affliction abounding. In 1 Corinthians 14:12, he speaks of spiritual gifts abounding. And in 2 Corinthians 4:15, he speaks of thanksgiving abounding. But you see, you can abound in all of those things, and if you don't abound in love, none of those things really matter. They don't matter. In some conservative evangelical churches, knowledge of Scripture abounds, but love for others does not. What holds your marriage together? Is it facts or is it love? And you say, well, Jesus Christ. Well, that's true. Jesus Christ does hold together. And hopefully your marriage is based on a strong biblical foundation. I'm not saying doctrine's not important here. But what really holds your marriage together at its core? It is mutual love for one another. What holds the church together? You say the power of God. Yes, I agree. But I mean, on a practical level, what holds the church together? Abounding, biblically driven love. And Paul explains what this love is to be grounded in. I want you to notice that he uses two terms. We may have different translations in this room, we probably do, but in my version of the NSV, it is real knowledge and all discernment. Whatever your translation is, the words are all rather similar. Real knowledge and all discernment. Now, what he means here is, he says, first of all, I want your love to be based on a real knowledge of Scripture. Okay? A real strong knowledge of Scripture. And then I want it to be based on discernment or spiritual perception. Spiritual perception. What he's saying is, I want you to have the knowledge of God's Word, and I want you to be able to perceive how to apply it throughout your life. He's taking knowledge to application. Alright? There are people who have a knowledge of Scripture, but they don't know how to apply it. They may have never been taught. There are others who are being told in churches how to please God, but the instructions are not based on the Bible. You know what happens then? People go along and say, I really want to please Christ, but the preacher isn't really telling me how, and I don't really know how to figure it out for myself, and they become frustrated and burned out with trying to be a Christian. Paul wants the church to have knowledge and the ability, the capacity to apply it. And then in verse 10, Paul says this. And this is, let me connect these things together. He's talked about loving, he's talked about discernment, he's talked about perception, and now he's saying, here is the purpose of all of that. The purpose of all of that, verse 10, is so that you may approve the things that are excellent, in order to be sincere and blameless until the day of